How's it going, everyone? Roslyn here. I know it's been a while since my last video, had some things going on that got in the way of being able to make any new ones, so apologies for that, but at least it gave me time to get through Metaphor for a second time and really dial in what archetypes and skills I liked best. So for this video, what I'm going to do is go character to character, briefly go over sort of the path I took them through the game, basically what archetypes I mainly used on them, and then show the different in-game builds that I use for each character, alongside any important equipment. Do note, however, that there will be some spoilers, but if I'm to show in-game builds, that's really unavoidable. With that out the way, let's get into it. Alright, so first up we have the main character. Now for the main character, I pretty much stuck with the Seeker lineage, the Mage lineage, and the Healer lineage throughout most of the game. And the main reason for that is that I just found that I preferred having the main character in a caster role who could also help support the party when necessary. Now I did branch out to other lineages in order to pick up important skills, but for any meaningful encounter, it was really on one of these three lineages that I stuck the main character on, based on whatever the encounter was. As for the in-game build for the main character, much to nobody's surprise, I chose to use the Prince, and really the Prince has three major things going for it. And the first of those is access to Hero's Cry. This is a fantastic ability that can be used once per battle, and once used, it will provide you immediately with 4 half press turns. Now there is a food item that gives this exact same effect, and it can be used multiple times per battle, but you do need to get the ingredients for it, and that takes up time, so it's more of a New Game Plus thing. In addition to Hero's Cry, the next big thing that the Prince has going for it is access to the Resist All passive. This is a fantastic passive skill that effectively reduces the damage the Prince takes by 50%, and best of all, it stacks with all other forms of damage reduction. This includes sturdy stance, back row bonus, buffs on your character, debuffs on the enemy, and of course, Barden's incredibly broken rank 4 passive. And combine all this together and your main character is effectively invincible. Oh, and I should probably mention this before somebody asks, but yes, my main character stats are very low. There's a reason for this. Basically, I chose not to spend any of my stat points for this hard mode playthrough. No real reason for that, I just thought, hey, it'd be kind of fun if we did a playthrough in which we didn't spend a single stat point, and so that's what I did. Anyways, the third main thing the Prince has going for it, and really the main reason to use the Prince archetype, is its ability to act as a support for all synthesis skills. This is incredibly powerful as synthesis skills will make up the bulk of your damage in the late game, and being able to support all of them is fantastic. To further support this, I inherit Magic Link and Arcane Unity. Magic Link will reduce the MP cost of all synthesis skills that cost MP, and then Arcane Unity will increase their strength and hit rate. The final piece of the puzzle for this is the Utilitarian's Manual accessory, which will reduce the turn icons for synthesis skills by 1. You can purchase this in the late game both from Grand Trad and Altabury Heights. Now for the last 2 skill slots, these are pretty flexible. I'm currently using Revitalize 3 and Shield Blessing, which together give me 16 MP per turn, but if you wanted something else, there are a lot of really good options. Just a couple of examples, you could use Sturdy Stance if you felt you need more damage reduction. Or if you were expecting to be hit with any sort of status elements, there's also Battle Master and Unshaken Will. Or you could forego passive options entirely and grab maybe a supporting ability or maybe an offensive ability that better suits the encounter that you are going to be going up against. Moving on, we have Stroll. Now for the most part for Stroll, I kept him on the Warrior line. I did branch out a little bit into the Brawler line in order to get him just another damage type, but pretty much he's stuck on Warrior throughout the entirety of the game. There were a couple battles where I put him on the Commander line where I needed him to kind of stay in the back line before I got access to a 5th party member, but yeah, it was pretty much just the Warrior line, and that leads really into his in-game archetype, which is the Royal Warrior. For the Royal Warrior, we're going to be looking to maximize the effectiveness of Brave Blade in order to turn Stroll into a critting machine. At a baseline, Brave Blade already has a high innate crit rate, but we're going to boost this further with Diligent Discipline and Critical Trade. Diligent Discipline is going to give us 5% increased crit rate, and Critical Trade will double our chances to critically hit an enemy. Now as with the main character, the last 2 skill slots are pretty much free to be whatever you want. I'm choosing to use Sturdy Stance and Revitalize 3. Revitalize 3 just gives him a little bit more MP efficiency, and Sturdy Stance is here because if you're playing Stroll, he's going to be on the front line, and if he's on the front line, you can't make use of Barden's incredibly broken rank 4, and so I want him to have a little bit more defensive capabilities, thus I chose Sturdy Stance. Now the cherry on top for this build is the Gambler's Manual accessory, which doubles critical hit damage, really pushing Stroll over the edge. To get this, all you need to do is reach gold rank 1 in the Coliseum. Lastly, before we move on, I feel like I should at least touch on Hasotobi. Unfortunately, unlike in a normal Persona title, in this game, Hasotobi is very bad, so if you really need AoE damage, go ahead and just use Vorpal Blade instead. Next up is Hulkenberg, and for much of the early playthrough, I kept her to the Knight lineage because there was a lot of single target damage going out from enemies, and so I was able to make good use of her Knight's Proclamation. However, once I started to get to the mid game and enemies started using a lot more AoE damage, and I got access to Barden's rank 4 passive, I actually swapped her over primarily to the Commander line, and that's where I kept her for most of the game from then on. Now when it comes to in-game builds for Hulkenberg, you actually have a couple options here. The one that I think most people will use is going to be the Royal Knight. When playing her as a Royal Knight, you're really looking to maximize Holy Knight's Proclamation with Noble Knight's Soul, and then also Omni Counter. This is a chance, but it actually procs fairly often. Basically, you'll put her on the front line or back line wherever you need her, then you'll use Knight's Proclamation, and you'll try to soak up any single target damage you can while also getting counters off of Omni Counter so that you can remove enemy press turns. When using her as a Royal Knight, the skills I like to inherit are Shelter Formation, Meta Line, Revitalize 3, and Shield Blessing. Shelter Formation will move your entire party to the back row and then increase their defense by 2 ranks. When you combine this with Barden's rank 4 passive, it will significantly reduce incoming damage. The reason for Meta Line is because of how effective and efficient it is when combined with Shelter Formation, and it's more than enough healing when you put everybody on the back row. And then Revitalize and Shield Blessing are to help with MP efficiency because Shelter Formation can get pretty costly, especially when you fight enemies that like to dispel you. Now I did say that Hulkenberg had a couple of in-game options, and actually the Royal Knight is not my favorite one. I actually prefer to keep her as a Warlord, and there are a couple of reasons for this. The first is that I like to center my playstyle and strategy around Barden's rank 4 passive because of how incredibly broken it is. But doing this does mean that I need to keep my party on the back row, and by virtue of being on the back row, most of my damage is going to be coming from magic. And it just so happens that the Warlord really supports this. The first way is through back boost, which will increase the magic damage of all my allies by 10%. It should be noted that this does not buff the Warlord's magic damage, only your other party members, and it does not stack, so if you had this on all of your allies, you would still only get 10%. Still, it's a 10% boost for having the Warlord in your party. The other way that the Warlord supports this playstyle is through having some really good magic synthesis skills. You have a couple options for fire damage, you have an ice damage skill, and then you also get access to some almighty magic damage. However, what pushes the Warlord over the edge for me and makes it a must-include archetype is access to Dynast Formation. This is an incredibly powerful synthesis skill that increases the attack, defense, hit, and evasion for all of your party members by 3 full ranks. In Persona 5 Royal terms, this is like casting Thermopylae, and if we were to equate this to SMT5, this is basically casting Luster Candy on your party twice with only 1 skill. It's incredibly powerful. Finally, as for the skills that I like to inherit for the Warlord, the only important one is Magic Link, as otherwise Dynast Formation would cost a whopping 70 MP, this makes it 35 MP. And then for the other 3 skill slots, they can be whatever you want. I tend to slot in Revitalize 3 and Shield Blessing to help with MP efficiency, and then I like to use Meta Line for reasons I stated earlier, but like I said, these last 3 slots can be whatever you want, as the only important one is Magic Link, so feel free to slot in anything else you need for whatever the situation calls for. Oh, and of course, Hulkenberg will be using the Utilitarian's Manual accessory with this build in order to reduce that press turn cost of all the synthesis skills by 1. Next up is Haizame, and for most of the playthrough, I actually had him on the Faker line, and there's a couple reasons for this. I knew I was going to want somebody to play the Faker role in order to be able to debuff enemies, but also I wanted to be able to proc the Shield Blessing passive on all my characters easily, and I got a really good set of daggers early on called the Kamaitachi Blades, which put an AoE buff on all my party members, which was a surefire way to trigger it at the start of battle. That being said, later into the playthrough, I did transition him over into the Gunner line, especially once I got access to the Dragoon, where I kept him until I got the Royal Thief archetype, which is where I landed on him at the very end. Now, even once I swapped him to the Royal Thief, I still had him maintain sort of a supporting role in the party, and there's a number of ways he was able to do this. One way is through the Noble Thief's Soul. This is an incredibly powerful passive ability, especially on Haizame, who can easily hit 99 agility at the end of the game. Basically, if he dodges an attack, it'll deplete all of the enemy's press turns. And it combines really well with the Third Eye, which will have the enemy's hit rate whenever they attack Haizame. To round out the support dodge playstyle, I gave him Vidyartha in order to debuff enemies, and then I gave him Shadow Dwellers for an additional 5% chance to evade. For the last 2 skill slots, I currently have Arcane Unity and Revitalize 3. Revitalize 3 just helps with MP efficiency, and Arcane Unity increases the strength and hit rate of synthesis skills. Now, either one of these can be dropped for another skill if you need to for a given encounter, however I would lean towards dropping Revitalize 3 first, as Arcane Unity does help out with the synthesis skill Blood Train Twin Nimpo to ensure that it doesn't miss, as this is just a great way to remove status effects as well as repels and buffs on an enemy. As for Hazume's accessories, I do like to use the Utilitarian's manual on him as well in order to reduce the turn cost of his synthesis skills. However, if you know that you're not going to need to dispel any repel effects or buffs or anything like that, this can easily be swapped for something else. Next up we have Juna, and she actually became my main damage dealer for the put everybody on the back row and abuse Barden's rank 4 passive setup. To this end, I put her on the mage lineage and pretty much kept her there until the end of the game. Despite this though, I actually have 3 in-game builds for her, though 2 of them are similar. For the 2 that are similar, that would be Elemental Master or Warlock, just depending on whatever the encounter is that you're going to be tackling. That being said, the Elemental Master is more versatile and it's the one I use the majority of the time. When playing Juna as an Elemental Master, you're very rarely going to use your Archetype skills, and instead you're going to be relying on your Synthesis skills for the majority of your damage. Doing this gives you good AoE and single target options, and they tend to hit harder as well. Now because Juna is going to be dealing the majority of her damage with Synthesis skills, it's all the more important that we use the Utilitarian's manual on her in order to reduce the press turn cost of those skills by 1. And of course we will also be inheriting Arcane Unity to increase the strength of those Synthesis skills as well as their hit rate. As for the other 3 skill slots, these can be whatever you want. I'm currently using Revitalize 3, Sturdy Stance, and Magic Circle. Magic Circle is just 10% more magic attack, Sturdy Stance just reduces all damage by 50%, and then Revitalize 3 is basically all she needs to maintain full efficiency on MP, but like I said, if you need something else, swap one of these out in order to grab what you need for whatever given encounter you're on. The Warlock version of this build is basically the same. All of your damage is still going to come from Synthesis skills. The only real difference is that we drop the Magic Circle in order to grab Magic Link. Now as for that third in-game build I mentioned, it's actually a highly specialized build meant for a physical party, and for that we either use the Royal Masked Dancer or the Persona Master. Either one of these 2 will work. And really what we're after here is the Synthesis skill Masquerade Charge, which will cast Charge on your entire party. Because Masquerade Charge is the main reason for this build, we will be using the Utilitarian's manual accessory in order to reduce the press turn cost of it to 1, but this does also mean that we don't get to use a mask. Still, that's a small price to pay for being able to give charge to your entire party in a physical comp. To round out the build, I like to inherit Vidyartha and Dekaja. These are both supporting options, and this is a supporting build, so we get the ability to debuff attack and defense, and remove debuffs from the enemy. And then also, I like to have Sturdy Stance in this build, and then Revitalize 3 for some MP efficiency, though these last 2 here can be changed for anything else that you think you might need for a given encounter. Moving on, we have Yufa, and with her, I pretty much stuck with the summoner lineage for the entirety of my playthrough. There was, I think, a handful of situations where I swapped over to the mage lineage, but in general, she was a summoner through and through until the end of the game. Now, the interesting thing about the summoner line is that all 3 of the archetypes, the summoner, the devil summoner, and the royal summoner, can all be your in-game build. It really just comes down to what skills you want access to, as the different summoners have different base skills and different synthesis skills. For example, the Royal Summoner gets access to some of the best archetype summons. You get access to the Summon Fairy Modified and the Summon Dragon God Modified, which deal immense amounts of damage, and you also get a nice reset button in Summon Harvest God, which will fully heal and revive all allies. However, the downside is, you only have 2 synthesis skills. If we then compare that with the Devil Summoner, you get some pretty decent skills in here, but they're not quite as powerful as the Royal Summoners are, but you get access to more overall synthesis skills, giving you a better variety here if that's the way you're going to be dealing damage. And then we have the regular summoner, which while lower on the damage side of things, does come with some extra utility. You have the ability to cleanse an ally status element and give them a regen effect for 3 turns, you can lower a target's defense for 3 turns, you can lower all targets' attack by 3 stages for 3 turns, and you can even dispel buffs off of the enemies. They're all valuable, and it really just depends on what your party needs in any given situation. Regardless of which one you use, the inherited skills are mostly the same. For the summoner, I would do Arcane Unity, Magic Link, Revitalize 3, and Shield Blessing. Revitalize 3 and Shield Blessing are for MP efficiency. Summoner abilities can be quite costly. Magic Link reduces the MP cost of synthesis skills by half, and then Arcane Unity increases their damage output and hit rate. And then for the Devil Summoner, I keep the Arcane Unity and Magic Link as well as Revitalize 3, but I replace Shield Blessing with Vidyartha, that way we can maintain some debuffing capabilities. And then finally for the Royal Summoner, I keep Vidyartha, Arcane Unity, and Revitalize 3, but I add back in Shield Blessing over Magic Link since there's less of an emphasis on synthesis skills with the Royal Summoner. Now when it comes to equipment for Yufa, I do like to use the Utilitarian's manual accessory in order to reduce the press turn cost of synthesis skills by 1. However, if you happen to have the Mystic Kreuzer weapon, then you can replace the manual with a different accessory, as the Mystic Kreuzer has the Utilitarian's manual effect built into it. Last but not least, we have Basilio. Now, because you get access to him so late, I actually kept him on the sidelines until he was ready to go for his in-game build, which is the Royal Berserker. At which point, Basilio gets really powerful with Wanton Destruction, Stormbreaker Axe, and Peerless Warcry being the notable standouts. Peerless Warcry allows him to reduce the attack and defense of all enemies by 3 ranks for 2 turns, and then Stormbreaker Axe allows him to remove buffs off of enemies. And then you have Wanton Destruction, which is his main source of damage, dealing extreme physical strike damage to one enemy, but more importantly, also inflicting a one-time weakness to strike. This basically allows you to cycle weakness hits every single turn, getting you a bunch of extra free press turns. For inheritable skills, I like to take Strike Boost for a 20% increase to strike attack, and then Heat Up for a further 10% increase to physical attacks. I then also take Sturdy Stance since he is a frontline fighter, and finally Revitalize 3 for some MP efficiency. When it comes to equipment on him, I do currently use the Utilitarian's manual accessory in order to reduce the turn count cost of synthesis skills, and this is mainly because of the Deadly Eraser synthesis skill. This deals severe almighty physical damage to an enemy, but it also removes status, repel, and strength buff effects on them. If you know you're not going to need this ability for a given encounter, then you can obviously swap his accessory with anything else. And that'll do it for this video going over in-game archetype builds in Metaphor ReFantazio. If you found this video helpful and informative, please be sure to leave a like and consider subscribing to the channel if you haven't already. Also, if you have any questions about this video, Metaphor, or any other game that I cover, feel free to hit me up over on Twitch at twitch.tv/RoslinGaming or my Discord server, both of which are linked in the video description below. Until next time, take care.